Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military of a Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 31st of August of 2025. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Russian strategical regrouping once again. According to different sources, Russia is finalizing its strategic regrouping, having redeployed forces from Sumy and Kherson. Its offensive will likely enter a new phase soon. Furthermore, today several pro-Ukrainian sources reported that tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, the Russians will launch another full-scale offensive operation, most likely with the purpose to break Ukrainian defense completely around the city of Pokrovsk and to take the initiative completely in their hands. So tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, we are waiting for additional changes and very fierce clashes for this territory. As of now, the Russians continue their offensive operation along the entire line of combat contact. And first, let's talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions once again. So let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 30th of August of 2025, and according to different sources, the Russians improved their positions to the north of the settlement of Kamyshyvaha, and the Russians captured the village of Kamyshyvaha itself. Even we have a video that confirms the presence of the Russian forces on the territory of this settlement. Today we got additional reports, and today's pro-Ukrainian mappers, pro-Russian mappers and neutral mappers reported that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to improve their positions once again significantly. As of now, it's very difficult to understand the status of this pocket, whether there are still Ukrainian soldiers or not, but we understand if there are Ukrainian units in the area of this pocket, most likely they were caught in cauldron without any chances for evacuation. We expect that during the upcoming nights, the Ukrainians either will be able to break through from this area and to evacuate, or the Ukrainians would be destroyed in this area completely, and all this pocket, including territories to the north of Kamyshyvaha, would be colored in Russian favor. So this stage of the Zaporizhzhia offensive operation has ended. And now the Russians are entered probably the most important stage, the battle for the second half of this pocket of the South Zaporizhzhia direction. Why I'm telling you that for the second half, first of all, I would like to remind you that the Zaporizhzhia, the Eastern Zaporizhzhia offensive operation, started at the same time when Ukrainians lost control over the settlement by the name of Velika Novoselka. And the Eastern Zaporizhzhia offensive operation lays between two barriers. This is the first barrier. We are talking about the river of Mokre Yali that goes from the north, from the settlement of Novopavlovka in the southern direction, and the settlement of Velika Novoselovka is located exactly along this river. And the Russians are advancing towards the next natural barrier. We are talking about the river between the cities of Gulyai Polye and the settlement by the name of Pokrovsk. So this is the second river, and this river has the title of Haichul. So this is the next river in the western direction from the Russian offensive operation. So let's add this river once again. And we are talking not just about river. First of all, we are talking about the most important supply chain between the cities of Pokrovsk and Gulyai Polye. So we're talking about this part. So basically, when talking about this configuration of the front line, we see that the Russians managed to probably pass up to 45% of this territory. So since the beginning of the Zaporizhzhia offensive operation, the Russians managed to improve their positions for almost 22 kilometers. And the entire and the total length of this, let's say, foothold between rivers and between the R85 road and the river of Mokre Yali is 45 kilometers. So as you can see, the Russians reached almost have already passed around 50% of these territories. So which means that the Russians are entering the most decisive part, because from this very moment the Russians will become much further and further from their main supply lines, from the main cities and towns to the east of the area of offensive, and the Russians will get very close and closer to the kill zones, that were established by Ukrainians around the city of Gulyai-Pole and the city of Pokrovsk. So the Russians are entering the most decisive part of this offensive. So that is why it is very important for the armed force of the Russian Federation during this offensive operation as fast as possible and as soon as possible to take as many as possible more or less big towns and villages in this direction. And when talking about the middle part of this offensive operation, there are just several cities and towns that fit Russian requirements. First of all, the village of Velika Mikhailovka, pretty big village. If Russians establish control over the territory, this will allow the Russians to boost their offensive further in the western direction. We are talking about the settlement of Uspenovka, but when talking about this village, the Russians are still too far from this area, and we have another village which is very small, much smaller than these two ones, but this village can allow the Russians to concentrate additional forces and forces of brigade level. We are talking about the village of Berezove. So this is the first more or less big village on the way of Russian offensive operation, and if Russians take this village under control, then they will be able, first of all, to dig deeper between the Uspenovka city and the Velika Mikhailovka city, which will allow the Russians to cut this Zaporizhzhia offensive operation into several pieces and then to handle with every single piece separately. So currently, the vital settlement during this stage of offensive operation for the middle line of the entire Zaporizhzhia offensive is the battle for the settlement of Berezove. And according to several sources, today the Russians, after the fall of the settlement of Kamyshevacha, launched their first probe attacks in the direction of the settlement. In this video, we can see how the Russians began bombing the settlement with aviation and with bombs, which means that this is their primary target and this is what exactly they're tasked for. So we are entering a very interesting phase, which will give us the real understanding whether the Russians are able to get as close as possible to Air 85 road during this year, or this offensive operation, the Gulyai-Pole offensive or the Pokrovsk offensive operations, would be postponed for the early spring of 2026. We believe that the Russians will try to do everything they can with the purpose to, during this period of time, while it's possible, while the surface, while the ground, while fields, rivers allows them to move further in the western direction. At some point, around October of 2025, the Russians will lose any possibilities to move further in the western direction due to weather and condition of the ground. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours, very interesting details and updates were recorded. And first, let's talk about the southwestern part. According to different mappers, mainly according to pro-Russian resources and according to Western resources, during the previous 24 hours, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their positions significantly. The Russians, as you can see, took under control a very important stronghold that lays along M30 road. We are talking about this stronghold that looks like butterfly, and the Russians call this stronghold a butterfly stronghold. So this territory was taken by the Russians. Furthermore, the Russians improved their positions significantly in the southern parts of the Pokrovsk agglomeration itself. So as you can see, very important positions were taken by the Russians. Once again, the stronghold of Butterfly and the residential area to the west of the main Ukrainian citadel in the southern part. So these territory were taken by the Russians, but we need to understand the difference. If you remember, 4 or 5 weeks ago, we had already updates in this area, but when talking about that period of time of 5-6 weeks ago, then we were talking about sabotage and reconnaissance group that managed to improve their positions in this area. And as for the 31st of August, first of all, we are talking about regular Russian army, which means that we are not talking about sabotage and reconnaissance group, we are talking about real control by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians restored control over the territories to the northeast of the settlement of Leontovichi. So we are talking about for the southwestern part of the city of Pokrovsk. So all these blocks were retaken by the Russians, and some of them were taken just for the first time by the Russians, which means that something big and something probably not good is happening, something not well is happening with Ukrainians. They left three important areas. This residential part, area to the east and southeast of Trayanda, and the Butterfly stronghold. So something is happening. Maybe we're talking about, let's say, first consequences of ended Russian strategical regrouping. So the Russians received additional reinforcements and reserves, and they began offensive operation. Or it's just an attempt from the Ukrainian side, probably to stabilize the situation in the northeastern flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. So that is why they decided to redeploy as many as possible capable units exactly in this area. So, and that is why they were forced, let's say, to sacrifice with the city of Pokrovsk itself. As of now, there's still not so many updates about this, so let's wait for several days and obviously everything will become clear to us. As for the city of Mirnograd, today the Russian authorities reported that first sabotage and reconnaissance group entered the city of Dimitrov. The city, the title of the Dimitrov, the name of Dimitrov, is a former name of the city of Mirnograd. And the Russians are saying that the first sabotage and reconnaissance group entered the settlement. As of now, we don't have any proof to confirm this information, so that is why we will not change the map, but we need to keep this information because maybe during the upcoming days we're going to receive additional videos that will confirm this. As for the area of Russian breakthrough, during the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of updates, but the most important that we got completely different updates provided by pro-Russian resources and by pro-Ukrainian resources. So first, let's talk about the pro-Russian resources. During the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, they managed to improve their positions and to get as close as possible to the villages of Sofiivka and Shakhova from the east. This information was confirmed by the video published by Ukrainian sources. Here we can see how Ukrainians of 117th Mechanized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine were attacking after withdrawing Russian units in this area. So this episode, one of the episodes of this video was geolocated exactly in this point. Based on this video, the map was adjusted. Another important video is coming from the area between Shakhova and Toretska. I'm talking about this video. This is very important, by the way, video. Let's discuss this video in details. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were trying to supply and support their forces along the line of combat contact between the villages of Toretska and Shakhova. Here we can see a vehicle that brought additional arms and weapons to the soldiers of the armored forces of Ukraine in this area. The Russians, as a result of this reconnaissance operation, managed to discover the position of the armored forces of Ukraine, and then the Russians bombed this territory with aviation, with FAB. So just a regular video that we can see almost in every single point of the line of combat contact. But the most importance of this video is that this video was made by the Slavyanka group. And this group used to fight in the area, used to be located in the area of the city by the name of Kondratovka. If you remember, during July and August, during the Ukrainian counter-offensive in this area, we were talking a lot about Russian aviation strikes on this forest, on different parts of the settlement of Kondratovka. And all those videos were published by Russian group, probably group Slavyanka. And today, as we can see, according to the video published from the Pokrovsk direction, we see that this group, including FPV drone operators and aviation, was redeployed in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk. So that is why, once again, it is very important to remind you once again the article we discussed at the beginning of this video. Russia is finalizing its strategic regrouping, having redeployed forces from Sumy and Kherson. So indeed, today we got a first proof that confirms that the Russians indeed redeployed very important units from the Sumy direction with the purpose to reinforce and to probably boost Russian offensive in the Pokrovsk direction, more precisely in the area of Russian breakthrough. So we see that, according to updates, the Russians are still focused to eliminate this Shakhova pocket. But when talking about pro-Ukrainian resources, today they publish completely different picture. The different mappers, national mappers, pro-Ukrainian mappers reported that Ukrainians, after a very short operational pause, resumed their counter-offensive operation. And as a result of first attacks of first hours, probably since the beginning or late of 29th of August of 2025, the armored forces of Ukraine managed to restore complete control over the settlement by the name of Vladimirovka. That was taken by the Russians, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, several days ago. Furthermore, the Ukrainians began counter-attack from Shakhova in the western direction. The Ukrainians managed to restore control over the settlement of Novoshachova, and now the Ukrainians are trying to cut the pocket around the settlement of Kucherev Yar completely. So Ukrainians are planning to take this, let's say, square under complete control, and obviously if Ukrainians are able to establish complete control over this territory, this will lead to a creation of a cauldron for the armored forces of the Russian Federation in the vicinity of Kucherev Yar. And this is exactly what the Ukrainians with this new offensive operation are trying to achieve. So very important situation. Ukrainians, no matter what, no matter the price, are trying to cut the pocket. The Russians are finishing their strategical regrouping, and the Russians, as we can see, intensify their offensive operation in the area of the city of Pokrovsk itself. So once again, currently we are witnessing a major battle, not just for the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration, but probably in the entire special military operation. And the results of this battle most likely will determine how exactly this conflict will be finished, in favor of Russia, in favor of Ukraine, or nobody will win and everybody will just lose. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinivka direction. During the previous 24 hours, nothing special was recorded. The regular work of Russian artillery, aviation, the Russians are trying to improve their positions, but several mappers reported that as for the 31st of August, Ukrainians counterattack Russians in the area of Pritiechna. And as a result of counteroffensive, Ukrainians entered a kill zone to the southwest of Pritiechna. Once again, this is not a gray zone, this is a kill zone. And most likely Ukrainians did this counterattack because Ukrainians realized that the Russians, after the end of the strategical regrouping, will try to attack the city of Konstantinivka with bigger power. So that is why they decided to counterattack and to take a kill zone with the purpose to win some time. Ukrainians most likely would be forced to fall back from this area, but this will allow them to win some time, for example, for Ukrainian tactical regrouping around the city. Lots of updates are coming from the Kramatorsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, lots of videos were published from this flank, how Russians were FPV droning Ukrainians along the entire line of combat contact. And as of the end of the 31st of August of 2025, currently this direction have very big value for us. And the thing is that, but if you remember, yesterday the Chief of General Staff of the Armored Forces of the Russian Federation made very interesting report about the situation on the ground in this direction. And according to him and according to the map that was revealed by the Minister of Defense and the General Staff of the Armored Forces of the Russian Federation, these territories are under complete Russian control. Once again, I would like to remind you that according to General Staff, the Armored Forces of the Russian Federation currently control all these territories, and that the villages of Fyodorovka, Markova and Maiskaya were caught by the Russians in cauldron, and these villages were encircled by the Russians. The fields, strongholds and fortifications around these villages are under complete control of the armored forces of the Russian Federation. These territories were taken by the Russians during offensive operation that started nobody knows when. So, and now we understand the value of these icons, because if the information that was provided by the General Staff of the Armored Forces of the Russian Federation is correct, this means that currently the Russians are trying to move further in the northern direction along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, with the purpose to outflank the Siversk agglomeration and to attack the settlements of Rai-Alexandrovka, Orikhovatka, Yurkovka, Nikonorovka from the south. If Russians are able to continue advancing further in the northern direction along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, this can lead to complete collapse of Ukrainian logistics. and including Russian progress on the ground in the area of Lyman and Zaporizhzhia, this can lead to a complete collapse of the entire Donbas Arc operation defense of the armed forces of Ukraine. As for the Siversk and Lyman directions, Siversk, no changes were recorded, just regular artillery duels. The Russians continue hunting Ukraine FPV drone operator bases. When they discover another position, they destroy it as soon as possible. At the same time, the Russians continue advancing in the Lyman direction, and during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded in Russian favor. This is the situation by the end of the 30th of August, and this is the situation by the end of the 31st of August. The Russians, according to information we have, managed to cut the settlement of Shandrigalo from supply and support completely. We believe we can start counting days when the Ukrainians would be completely exhausted and would be forced to fall back from this area. Very important settlement can come in Russian hands in coming days. Furthermore, pro-Ukrainian resources confirmed additional progress on the ground on the territory of the settlement of Zaporizhzhia. Very important foothold the Russians managed to establish as a result of offensive operation. The neutral and pro-Western mappers reported even bigger progress on the ground in favor of Russians in the northern part as well. So it seems that we can also start counting days before the village of Zaporizhzhia falls in Russian hands, which most likely is going to happen in coming days. We continue receiving very interesting updates from the Barova direction. The Ukrainians, it seems, lost their combat capabilities, and the Russians managed to get additional breakthrough. Today, several pro-Russian resources and neutral mappers reported about additional changes on the ground in Russian favor. During the previous days, we were talking a lot that the Russians took under control the settlement of Glushenkova. The Russians began offensive in the direction of Malievka. The Russians secured the village of Andriivka without facing any resistance from the Ukrainian side, and the Russians restored control over positions they lost during the 3rd Azov Brigade counterattack in the vicinity of Grekovka. So when summarizing everything, according to different sources, more or less reliable, this is the current situation on the ground. So the situation, as you can see, for Ukrainians is not so good. As for now, it's very difficult to understand what is going to be next because we are waiting for additional confirmation, but this configuration can confirm that at least several groups of the Azov Brigade, 3rd Azov Brigade, could be caught and cornered by the Russians in the pocket between Novomir and Olgovka, and several Ukrainian groups could be caught and cornered by the Russians in the area of the village of Redkadub. So the front line, as we can see, may collapse in coming days, and this can lead to additional progress on the ground, and most likely the Russians may try to develop their offensive operation in the direction of Pisky-Radkovsky. If Russians can take these territories under control, this can lead probably to complete collapse not just of the Barova direction, but this time most likely we are going to start talking about the Izum direction. And the Russians may try to attack in this area with the purpose to outflank the city of Slaviansk and to encircle the entire Kramatorsk, Slaviansk, Pokrovsk agglomerations also from the north. So we see that the Russians are trying to restore control over the territories they lost in 2022 during Ukrainian Kharkiv counteroffensive operation. And we see that the Russians were pretty successful in these attempts. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.